Erik from Projectum, and today we want to chat about the best practices for risk recording and reporting. And I believe Erik's got some surprises for us with regards to AI and how that can be used with the risk reporting and recording as well. So, without further ado, Erik, I would like to hand over to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Right. Well, thanks for having me back after a successful previous webinar. Yes, so like Bert is telling us, we're going to talk about risk and how are we going to record that and report on that using the tools that we have available. So a little bit about myself. My name is Erik van Hurck. I live in the Netherlands and I work for Projectum. And Projectum is the company that created Power PPM and Power Hub, two tools that we're going to see today. I've been around in the consulting business for 15 plus years, and I have recently been renewed as a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional based on my work as a blogger and YouTuber in the space of project management. Today, we're going to have 3 moments where we're going to look at demonstration, and we're going to talk about these topics here. So what we're going to see is different types of risk matrices that we can create. Matrices are basically the visualization of choice when it comes to risk management. We have likelihood, we have likelihood or probability and impact. And how are we going to visualize that in a tool? Like Bert also mentioned, we have generative AI nowadays, and it wouldn't be a webinar in 2024 if it didn't have any AI in it. We're going to briefly talk about that, and we might have a little sidestep to talk more about how we're using that in Power PPM. Then the second demonstration is going to revolve around escalation, mitigation, and about issues. Because having a risk registry alone on project level might not be sufficient for you. You might want to escalate these risks across the board, making it available on program level or on portfolio level even. Then mitigation is your registry on what you're going to do in the sense of risk management. Are you going to leave the risk alone, accept the risk, or are you going to actively chase it and work your way through alleviating the highest risk once it becomes an issue? Because issues are risks that have revolved in the actual world, right? A risk is something can potentially go wrong. An issue is that thing that could have gone wrong is actually going wrong. And we have a way to visualize those issues on a grid as well. As a last demonstration, we're going to take a look at Power PPM in combination with Power BI. At Projectum, we've created a tool called a Power Hub, and colleagues lovingly call it the time machine because it has the capability of doing trend analysis. And this trend analysis gives you the option to see the life cycle of a risk when from first conception all the way until it's either mitigated or it becomes an issue and you need to track it on another way. So we're going to switch between demonstration and presentation. Down the line, I will pause briefly in generative AI piece to give Bert the option to see if there's any questions from the room. And if so, if I can maybe help you out, resolve those. So, different ways of looking at risk matrices. The risk matrix is the by choice visualization of risks in anything. Basically, the first thing that comes to mind is a project or an initiative in the case that you don't want to have it called a project because you're more of an agile minded person. Risk matrices help visualize and prioritize which risks are most important. Scoring those risks on that matrix typically works with the likelihood that something is going to happen, as well as the impact if it is going to happen. So something that is very severe is if it happens, and it's very likely that it's going to happen, will be on the top right corner. And that top right corner is typically bright red. Customizing these risk matrices is very dependent on the organizational need. We see organizations that work with a 3x3 grid, low, medium, high for both probability and impact. But we also have exotic situations where we have a 10x10 grid or a 3x5 grid. And the tool that we're going to use today helps you and makes you able to work with those types of matrices. Okay. Click on the next slide here. So risk generation in a world of generative AI. You might have noticed, but there is an AI bloom happening right now, right? With generative AI functionality popping up everywhere where you look. So this webinar is no different. We're going to take a look at what generative AI can do for risks. The lowest hanging fruit is also the easiest to show, of course, is the generation and identification of new risks. Generative AI has a vast storage of information. It can help you create better text for your management of risks, and it supports you to get away from that blank page, because starting off with nothing is also more difficult than starting off with a suggestion from AI. It's my opinion that generative AI never will get to a point where it has the final verdict or the final version of your document or your risk or your project schedule or anything. You as a user might have certain tweaks that you want to put in because your project is a unique entity as it is. So our first demonstration, once again, there's going to be 3 during this call. We want to have 2 options to show for risk matrices. We have a classic and we have a more modern interface. We're going to show you what the pros and cons are of each of these, and we're going to generate a couple of risks, and some of them we're going to generate based on generative AI. So let me switch screen here. Are we seeing a blue welcome page?
Yeah, got it. Thanks.
All right, great. So this is my personal demonstration environment for Power PPM. Power PPM is our Power Platform-based solution, which holds projects, portfolios, programs. You even have strategic options such as OKRs or business drivers, and we have the ability to use reports. Now, for those that are unfamiliar with the Power Platform, this is Microsoft's low-code, no-code solution. And this particular type of app is a model-driven Power App. That basically means that there is a server backend called the Dataverse, which is in the cloud, by the way. There's still a cloud server somewhere. And this is a highly flexible application. What we're going to see is one version, and then I also have a second version of Power PPM that looks a little bit different. So like I mentioned, we have initiatives, and initiatives are projects or agile initiatives. So either way, we have the ability to see our projects or initiatives in this solution. We have 4 projects in there, and I have 2 that are for this specific workshop or webinar. And I'm the project manager for this, and there's not much to tell about this page here other than this is a details page that is highly customizable. If your organization wants to have something different for the latest status update, that can be done. If you don't work with portfolios, it can be removed as well. We have a timeline functionality, we have financial grid, but today we're most interested in risks. So if I click on risks here, what we'll see is the first version of a risk matrix. It has the ability to showcase both risks and issues. And what you can see is that when I hover over a cell, such as the 20% probability and the one level of impact, so this could also be low, medium, high, super high, and extreme, whatever case you need for your solution. Here you have risks. If I click on that, I can see that this is the first example risk. I also have the escalation here, and we'll go back to that in just a moment. If I navigate to the issues, we have this issue risk for portfolio level, which says that it is escalated. Now, this is the first version of a risk matrix, and it can be tuned to see, for instance, a 3x3 grid or a 6x6 grid or any exotic different version of a grid. This piece, however, is something that you would configure in a backend scenario. The other demonstration of a risk matrix can be found in this version of Power PPM. As I mentioned, this is a very customizable environment. And if I navigate to our initiatives here, and if I navigate to a project from my end, I have a demo project here, which is of type large project, and there's no issues on the KPI. And if I navigate to risks here, what I'll see is a different type of risk matrix. And this different type of risk matrix has two very nice little features here. First off, it has the option to go full screen so that you can focus on only the grid and see how that responds. It doesn't have the select option so that I can select on a single cell and only focus on these risks. But it does have the ability to increase or decrease the risk's location and its probability and impact. So we can have a extreme risk, or we can have a mediocre risk, and we can have a low kind of risk. On the right side, you'll see ranked, and that rank is, of course, based on the location of that risk. So if I create a new risk, a side pane opens up, and this side pane, once again, is customizable, but what we'll see is risk demonstration 2. It has a status that it's identified. The program and portfolio will come automatically from the project information here. I can have a description. And I can set probability and impact. I would also like to have a due date, and that's going to be on Monday. Now we see that that second risk shows up on the left side on a probability that's much higher than the ELO risk 1. So that means that it is ranking higher, and it's the risk that you want to focus on first before you start to discuss the ELO risk 1. This is very important in the sense that if you have a very big list of risks to go through, you can focus on the ones that are on the top right instead of looking at risks that aren't that important for your organization to work with. Another example of a risk matrix that's filled in quite substantially can be found here in the Accelerated Growth project. And here you see that there's a lot more risks visible. You can see that there's more information, and you can choose to have either the first two show with their text, or you can see that there's 20 risks in the high impact 20% probability list. And here again, you have the ability to move those risks around. So I really like this type of visualization of risks. The only downside here is that we don't have a visibility of the issues once they arrive. So keen eyes might have noticed there's a little button here on the left side. add AI generated risks. So this is one of the first use cases that we have in Power BPM to go and fetch generative AI values and include that in our solution. If I click on this, I get an option to write a prompt, a question that I would ask the AI solution, and I would get a response. Now, for those that are familiar with this icon, this is a ChatGPT icon, and that means that it can communicate with ChatGPT. However, there is risks of having this connect with ChatGPT because everything that goes into ChatGPT in the basic scenario will be used for training their AI. So what Microsoft also offers is their own AI solution, Copilot or Azure AI, and we can talk a little bit after this demonstration about that. That is more secure. Microsoft has a solution that is tailored on your tenant. So it is secure within your own boundaries. And Microsoft promises that every prompt and response that comes out of that isn't being used for training purposes. So let's have a nice prompt. Yeah, let's have a nice prompt. So easy situation, create 5 risks for building a house on a swamp. We can imagine any type of risk when you're building a house on a swamp. So it's easy to test and see if the generative AI actually comes up with something useful. So if we create that, get a nice message that it's going to add the generative AI risks themselves. And there's a process behind this. And what you'll see is, okay, well, mold, insect infestation, flooding, limited access, foundation instability. These all sound like valid risks when it comes to building a house on a swamp, right? And this is a very clear example, but generative AI has the ability to have that prompt being very extensive. So you can fill this up with anything that you want to tell the AI about your project, and it will come up with valid responses. Now, mind you, there's also still this situation of hallucination. The AI actually doesn't know anything about the real world. It's just a prediction engine. It's a very good prediction engine. So this is one of the examples of generative AI in our Power BPM solution. Let's navigate back to the page here and let's see if there's any questions from the audience.
Yeah, I think if there's nothing from the floor, I'd like to ask something, Erik, with regards to the licensing model, and you chatted briefly about ChatGPT versus Azure AI, etc. What options are available to potential customers that want to implement AI, want it to be secure, obviously, and I think I'm gonna call the elephant in the room the cheapest possible option to get or to get started with AI.
Yeah, well, great. So regarding that, I added this little slide here. What we've seen here is this scenario play out. We have on the left side, we have our Power PPM solution with the user request, which is the prompt that we ask the data. Then we have the option to grab more information. That green icon there is the Dataverse icon, where we have our information stored. And then the next stop is a Power Automated Flow, which asks the prompt that you gave it at the beginning. It might append additional information if you want that. And then it goes out to Azure. And specifically, that icon that you're seeing there is AI Builder. And now AI Builder is the fastest way to get started with generative AI in Microsoft's ecosystem, because AI Builder comes with credits. And with every license that you have in a Power Platform scenario, you get AI credits. So that means that most of the time, an organization will already have AI Builder credits without using them already. So this would be the low-hanging fruit when it comes to AI and getting started with AI in a project management setup. There's basically three scenarios. This is scenario two. Scenario one would be going in and adding an API key to ChatGPT. And then there's the ChatGPT costs of having a pro license. And last time I saw it was 20 euros. Euros as I'm in Europe, right? So 20 euros for a monthly subscription to get a API key. You would only need to use one, but there's that big risk of your data integrity. So you don't want to send out any corporate secrets or any corporate data through that API. Then the third option is actually Azure OpenAI or Microsoft Azure, or what are they calling it today? I think it's OpenAI or Azure AI. They changed the name a couple of times, so I'm not fully sure which one it is today. So the last option here is a solution building a model that is trained on your data. It's sort of like the Copilot solution that we're seeing Microsoft pushing everywhere, where it is grounded in your data. So not only it's going to grab your data in this request, in this setup that you're seeing on screen now, but it's also learning from everything that's in the Dataverse. So it might look at, for instance, we have scenarios where we have lessons learned, and in these lessons learned, we prompt the solution or the AI to look for other lessons learned on similar types of projects. And we've seen some very cool responses coming from generative AI in that sense. But that is a solution that will have additional costs because you'll have an Azure application running, and that has monthly costs as well as your data usage costs. And that's highly related to the amount of data and how active are you going to use it. So there's no pinpoint number that I can give you there.
No, awesome. Thank you very much.
All right, so let's have a look at our next demonstration. Let's prepare that a little bit, because I was talking about escalation of risks. We're going to look at mitigation as well as issues. So the first thing here is escalation of risks. What you have seen is probability and impact, but some of these risks might be so impactful that it's not going to impact only that project, but the organization as a whole. Or maybe that project is a part of a program, and you want to have better visibility on the right level of granularity. So it might make sense to not have a risk only stated in the project, but you want to escalate it and make it visible for higher management. So this escalation curve, we've created that in Power PPM as well, and it helps communicate better about your risks on the right level of management. Now, what you want to do is, when reporting risks, you also want to maintain an active mitigation list. And that might be different actions. In our solution, we have just a little box of text, but that can be added to track each mitigating action. And you can have multiple, and you can chase those. what we typically see when organizations adopt a risk management solution, they have frequent moments where they step back and go about and see the risks in their current status. That needs to be updated, and the mitigating actions need to be updated as well. And finally, what happens when a risk becomes an issue? Most of the time, it has a negative consequence on the project and maybe even the organization as a whole. So how are we going to address that promptly? Well, the first thing that you need to do is have those issues available in the system and visible in the system. And because we have mitigating actions already in there, it might make sense to address those during the work with those issues. So what we're going to look at is we're going to see escalation of a risk to a higher level. We're going to look at mitigating actions, and we're going to look at adopting additional fields and logic for issues. So let's return to our demo environment. So I have our typical risk example, and in here we created a couple of these risks. So we have the ability to escalate to program and escalate to portfolio. This is an interactive grid, and if I would like to have that mold growth escalate to a program level, because we might not be building just a house in a swamp, but actually a whole village, and the village is the program. That could be a case. So what happens now is I clicked on the escalate to program, and we saw a little text box here saying that it actually did save that. We can navigate to details, and we can see that the business link tells us that we're linked up to program 1. If I click on program 1, what I'll see is that I have a program entity. Now this, again, can be flexibly changed based on the organizational need. You might not have a life cycle for a program, or you might not have a timeline need for a program. One thing you do have is a list of all the activities that you're doing. Hold on. All the activities that you're doing, and here is that typical risk example. So that means that that risk example is here, and if I navigate to risks, what I'll see is nothing. That's always nice. Let me save and refresh, see if it works. Live demos. What I was expecting to see here is that risk of mold being here on that level. What we can do is do another test here. If I navigate to risks, and if I navigate to the mold, we can have a closer look at the program escalation. And now what I see is that that program or portfolio actually wasn't filled in. So program 1, let's also have it as portfolio 1. Let's save this. And if I navigate to program 1, I assume that that mold is available here now. So what you'll see is that on program level, we're looking at a initiative risk, but from a program level. So this is escalated now to the right level of granularity, where this risk is on a program level. So the program level stakeholders are going to communicate about this risk as well. Now, if in any case, this needs to go higher up, we can leave it out of the program. We can escalate it to portfolio level. And the same thing will happen where I click on save. And if I navigate to a portfolio level, I can take a look at a roadmap and see all the projects that are in there once it loads. It's updated to the latest version, also nice. But nothing has a schedule, always nice. But what we still see here is the two example projects, and if I go to the risk matrix, what I'll see is that there's additional risks on my portfolio level, or an issue that came from a project, but actually is a portfolio level issue now. And we have that mold growth show up here as well. And as you can see, this is a risk on portfolio level type of portfolio, and it has been escalated all the way up to that level. Now on this mold growth project risk, what you'll see is on the right side, I have the option to look at due dates, which is typically the date where you would revisit the risk, where you would look at the risk and if the status is any different. So what we can do is that due date is today, and we're going to actually look at the impact and risk status. We might want to say that because we have solved the water in the direct foundation of the site. That could be a mitigation. And if we have that mitigation in place, we could actually say that that probability is still high, but the impact would be less because we have that less amount of water. Now, this is a very simple rudimentary version of a mitigation. What we could also do is instead of having a single text file here, we could add a different layer or a subgrid of mitigating actions. And then we can report on each of those mitigating actions and see how they progress. We can also assign owners of those mitigating actions in order to have a better visibility of the progress. So that is when it comes to mitigation. Let's navigate back to our project and our DIPCO risk project. What we've seen in the risks scenario here is that there's an issue as well. Now, risks are things that could happen, and issues are actually things that have happened. So we can say that an infestation of insects is actually not at all a risk in a swamp. It is an issue, because we can imagine that there will be a lot of issues with insects in a swamp. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on this. And instead of saying that that risk is identified, we're actually going to say that it is an issue. When I click on Save and Close, what will happen is twofold. The insect infestation is going to show up in the issues list, and you can also see that that is showing up here in the impact is low, but the probability is very high. Now, mind you, the probability of an issue is 100%, but this is the last probability that it had before it became an issue. We also see that that risk stated is nice bright red, and you could even choose to showcase this from a issues first kind of scenario. So we have a risk for portfolio and we have the insect infestation. A further option that you could choose for is that once it's an issue, additional fields become available, because if it's an issue, it might have an effect on the financials for the project, or it might have an effect on the risks, other risks, or other parts of the solution. So that is escalation, mitigation, and risk status. You want to have all three in a valid risk management solution. Are there any questions regarding escalation issues and mitigations in the chat, Bert?
Nothing yet.
Right. So feel free to ask any questions if there's any. Bert, you wanted to remark on any of what you've seen here? Or? Shall we take a look
No,
at reporting? All
no, I
right.
think we can jump straight into reporting. This is very interesting stuff. I'm happy to say that we've got this available currently in the Power PPM solution, so that is pretty cool.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a blessing, I would say. So,
Yeah.
talking about reports, because like I mentioned previously, there is this Dataverse backend. Everything is stored in tables in this Dataverse solution. And what we've done for Power PPM is we created a time machine as well. And that time machine is called Power Hub. The capabilities that we have with Power Hub is every change that happens in the solution is being recorded in a SQL database on the Power Hub. So Power Hub is an Azure application that is provided by Projectum, and that listens in on any changes within the Power PPM. So if you change owner for a project, you have the ability to see when that happened and what the results are, right? If we have a risk and we're mitigating that risk and we're lowering the probability or the impact of that risk, that means that there is a score of that risk in the overall risk registry that is lowering. That trend analysis is something that we can use to see risk movement. But first, let's have a look at the Power BI options. And I just remembered that I refreshed my machine just before we went into this meeting. So let me see if I can, yeah, I still have those here. Open them up. And we have. So what we're going to look at is two different types of visualizations for risks within the Power PPM solution. Let's see which one comes up first. So this is the synoptic panel. We're going to look at that in a second. And what we're looking at here is a card visualization. Now, this is the easiest way of visualizing your risks within a application. What you'll see is here there's a lot of risks and there's even issues here. And you can see that each of these cells actually is a card visual. So for this cell here, what you'll see is that I'm filtering on a 3x3 grid or a 25 grid, because a 5x5 grid. And it is cell number 1, 3. So it's 1 on the probability and it's 3 on the impact. Now, immediately it might become clear that this is actually 25 different visuals plus the image. So that means that there's a lot of computation that's going to happen on Power BI that might mean that that it's going to be a slow page when loading. Now, what we can do, of course, is I can group this and I can, where is it? Yep, group. And that means that if I move that visual, all the cards will stay within that grid. However, one thing that I have noticed here is that if I lower the size of that grid, the actual fields here don't populate or move correctly with the rest of the visualization. So this is our first version of a risk matrix in Power BI. And the upside here is it's not using any custom visualizations because custom visualizations aren't created by Microsoft themselves. It might be that your organization has chosen not to go with a custom visual. And then this is the best way to visualize your risks. However, if we have the option to go for custom visuals in an organization, you might want to invest and look for the Synoptic panel by OKFizz. This is an organization that's created a visualization based on imagery. So this could be a floor plan of your organization or a sitemap or a risk matrix. So in this sense, I've created this visual of a risk matrix. It has the probability and impact, and it has these 9 grids. Now, each of these grids are a unique location in the synoptic panel, but this is now one visual. So I can increase and decrease the size, and I can select a single cell, and it will respond with the rest of the information that we have here. So that means that the synoptic panel is actually a faster solution and a more interactive solution when it comes to visualizing Power BI reports for your risks. Now, as I mentioned, it's a flexible solution, the synoptic panel, and you can create an image based on the way that you visualize your risks. Remember from the beginning, we had a 5x3 grid, or we had a 10x10 grid. I actually have a 9 grid and I have a 25 grid here. And both will respond based on the grid values we have here. So I can see that this responds nicely and this one responds differently as well. Very interactive, and because the data is in Dataverse through that SQL connection of Power Hub, it's actually updating based on the refresh rate you have your Power BI refreshes on. So that means in a pro license scenario, you would have 8 times a day where it refreshes the data. And then you have your risk registry on everything you have within the project or within Power PPM as a whole. So this is a very nice way to visualize your current risks. But there is an option to have a risk registry that also looks at history. And that is not this page, but this page. What we see here is a Power BI embedded version of a report. So once again, we're in Power PPM, and I have this section here called PMO report. And this is a fully interactive Power BI report inside your project management solution. So very powerful because it's close to where the customer is, or the customer in this sense being your project managers. One thing we have here is the history and predictions. And in the history scenario, what we're looking at is that overall score of your risks and the business impact it might have. What we're seeing here is a portfolio overview of different projects in our solution and where they stand in a grid where we look at business impact and risk level. The size of these is the total amount of distributed costs of these risks when they occur. One thing we can do is we can look back in the different years. We can see the movement of our risk scores. And we saw that this one moves quite a lot. If we want to focus in on that project and how it moved across time, we can actually press that button and we can see that it moved from an impact that's not that high, but a risk level that was high, to all the way to the right and back because we mitigated some of the risks. We can also look at this one, and if we focus on that timeline again, or that play button again, we can see that movement of that particular project and all the risks that are associated with it. So this is something that we can do based on that Power Hub, that time machine that we can add to our Power PPM solution. And with that, that is what I had to tell you about risks for now. As Bert might have already communicated, this is recorded, and the slide deck is available to you after. Just reach out to Bert, I would say. Any final remarks from your end, Bert?
No, I need to say thank you again for joining us and showing us all this fantastic stuff. It's really interesting. I'm going to give, I think we've got a minute left. Just going to see if nobody else has anything, and if nothing, then we can end this webcast, and we'll obviously save the recordings on social media and share with the participants once we've got
Yeah,
this recording
great.
edited.
And the recording, it will be available on YouTube, was what I heard.
Yep.
So if there's any questions based on what you've seen here and you're looking at it in the future, please reach out and we'll chat on the comment section in YouTube, I would say.
Yeah, there we go. So that's it from our side. Once again, thank you very much for joining, and thank you, Erik, for your time. And we'll
Yep.
chat again soon.
Thank you very much. See you all later. Bye.